Okay, so it's a privilege to be talking about this important subject. The attempts to contain bad thinking series continues. This time on the presentation is on the well-worn subject of Zizek's wrong-headed view about Dostoevsky's putative saying, which whether or not it appears in exact form in the text is a little bit unclear about if there is no God, then everything is permitted, which he lifts out of its just hearing this statement for what it says, so we may not very well, each one will come to their own interpretation of it, and will be in a chaos. But assuming that Dostoevsky has meant something by that, which can be derived from his novels, particularly, of course, the Brothers Karamazov, which is the character Ivan, is most associated with this phrase, and I think Nishitani, if I remember correctly, has gone through the 4 stages of Dostoevsky's nihilism and his interpretation of Dostoevsky's development, and said this is the deepest stage, the most superficial stage, being the Raskolnikov and the murder on the basis of some kind of claim that one can commit certain acts as long as they're ultimately beneficial to society. This kind of Nutzen for the folk, as Carl Schmitt has put it. I mean, it's not exactly clear that Carl Schmitt wrote this statements of the Nazi Handbook of Legislation or not, but it's credited to him that this fundamental statement that the whatsoever of benefit to the folk is recht or legally right, and whatever is shoddy or harmful to the folk is unrecht or legally unright. If you follow that logic, then you can see very rapidly that since the law is doing what otherwise would be considered great harm through the justification that it has to keep law and it has to keep order, and that it's in the interest of some group, this simply means that somebody would directly take it upon themselves to, so in the case of the book, commit a murder in order that they could ultimately get the funds to carry out some kind of projects that would benefit the whole people. And then this is taken in less external and more total form, so that the Dasein is involved, which is to say the whole of the world, inclusive of the one that's there in the world, is involved in the Brothers Karamazov version. So let's start with one statement of why it's plausible to say that this is simply a wrong-headed way that Zizek is arguing here. One reason is because Zizek simply hoists the whole thing out of the context of the whole life of Dostoevsky, and attributes it to the situation of so-called late capitalism or current age capitalism, and especially around the notion of surplus value, which he then, through all kinds of strangely complex conceptions, weaves into different theoretical matrices, the Lacanian notions and so on, and the jouissance, and this notion that once you take up this Lockean principle that um, what is sought is not pleasure or happiness, but rather the means to pleasure and happiness. So, for instance, somebody once said to me, I could take a vacation, I could take a trip to Macau, but I don't have to because it had this Lockean idea, like I have the means to do it, and that's the pleasure. So as soon as you start seeing just the accumulation of the means, which would be um, financial capital or money, is the happiness, then you get this Ebenezer Scrooge situation, which in former times was viewed as pathological, and which Aristotle has already denounced as the wrong use. Money is supposed to be some kind of convenience for seeing that everything is greased, as Milton Friedman put it in the city. There's may involve a little bit of corruption, but ultimately it's healthy for the city, just as there's a lot of things going on in the body that are probably not we don't want to look at. But nonetheless, that could be the part of the workings of a healthy body. Um, on the other side, as I was just going into, so that's Zizek's wrong placement of the whole theme into a situation that didn't exist for Dostoevsky. So because Dostoevsky lives in a time when like 90% of the people are, Dugin says more than 90% of the people were, like 1860 or so, were peasants. Some of them, like, I think it's like 1870 or something, like Tsar Alexander liberated the serfs. So during Dostoevsky's lifetime, I believe. And the new kind of slightly more liberal laws that come out against dueling and things like that. But the situation is absolutely nothing like the situation which Zizek is superimposing onto this mere phrase. So if you just take the phrase, if there is no God, everything is permitted, then of course you could do whatever you want with it. And so that's what he does do, but that's kind of, it's misleading, and it's a kind of sophistry. And it's also, let's put it in another way, we don't get to, if we think Dostoevsky has anything to say, then we don't hear him. You have to hear him the way that he's, what he's trying to say. Of course, one could always say, just as with Plato, Dostoevsky hasn't said, I, Dostoevsky, hold these views. Even in most of what he published, like his writer's diaries, he didn't speak directly as himself. Sometimes he did. But in the case of his novels, of course, there's characters. Just as in Plato, there's usually historical persons, but put into artistic form, placed into situations of verisimilitude, such that sometimes we're not quite sure whether these discussions actually happened. Sometimes we could prove they couldn't have happened because of when the people died or whatever. For example, in the Locus, I think maybe it's really stretching it that the discussion happened between the Socrates and these generals, because they kind of lived at the same time, but maybe they didn't. I forget the exact details, but we could make all kinds of analysis like that as to whether these discussions really happened, such as, say, the apology of Socrates. We're fairly assured that it did happen, and we have it from more than one, not just from Plato, but also from Xenophon, and there's slight differences in the transcript, as it were. So that's the first step, I think, to the argument is, if we want to hear Dostoevsky, we can't just make things up. We can't just be an activist like Zizek is, who wants to say, oh, here's something interesting, and I'll play with this phrase in a Procrustean way and make it fit my interesting notions. So then the second part is, so I just earlier, just a few minutes ago, I gave a little account of sort of basically what Zizek is getting at with his version, which is that instead of happiness, or instead of the pleasure of what money can buy, money itself becomes this goal in itself, which is always negative and always causes problems. Um, but what is Dostoevsky thinking about? What he's thinking about is um, more like a question like, is there a natural law which says certain deeds simply can't be done? For instance, cannibalism. Is it so that um, no matter what, um, even if it means dying, one must not become a cannibal, because this is an outrageous act and totally immoral? And the same thing with murder. So the murder is probably the most obvious example, although maybe the abuse of small children is even a more strong example, which is also used in Brothers Karamazov. But the question is, again, it's not at all the same question. That what Dostoevsky is thinking about is simply not the same type of thing that Zizek is superimposing onto the statement. What he's saying is, if there is no God, then every action is permissible, including child rape, as by Stavrogin in The Possessed, or the demons, including murder, as by um, Raskolnikov in the Crime and Punishment, and then there's various more subtle levels where we allow ourselves to become, for instance, in our emotional attitude, different. Such as, for instance, there's a film, it's called Babyface, with Barbara Stanwyck from the pre-code Hollywood, where the character tells her to take up a Nietzschean attitude towards life, and instead of accepting a job where she would be exploited by men in a strip club, she should use her sexuality to get to the top of the rung in the corporate world and exploit men through the first scene, the first step on this is like she gives a blowjob to some guy to get into the personnel department or something, to get her first job, and then it's like she rises up from there. So the notion that one can't just use oneself in any way and transform oneself into any kind of being would be one level of this Dostoevskian claim. If there is no God, then everything is permitted. Is it permitted to make oneself simply a creature of pure exploitation of the others? And then there's different levels leading up to the Ivan character, where as it were, the Dasein of the person themselves transforms, so that everything is different. So I wanted to say Zizek doesn't touch on any of these themes. He has no notion of them. Why is Zizek so stupid? I don't know. I would give that my explanation to that is: one, he wants to exploit the situation to say something interesting. Two, he has no inner life. He's extremely extroverted to such an extent he doesn't even know that he's extroverted. He doesn't see the potential to transform the inner attitude of a person and the danger of that. He doesn't see how this happens over generations, or how it happens in the Pauline type of moments. He, of course, is aware of these things on the apodictic level of being able to repeat. Paul had a moment of conversion or whatever, but he has no inner sense of what these things are and how dangerous they are. And that would be just to tickle the surface of the uh, pernicious uh, um, possibilities of being misled by Zizek in this kind of account. Um, so uh, we should be aware that this is not an accurate account that Zizek is pushing, and if we're aware of that, then okay, we could be, that's fine. You can use it any way that he wants, and take over little fragments of Dostoevsky and use them however he wants. But I think we should be told that this isn't anything to do with Dostoevsky, but it's just like using spare parts as like a bricoleur to make something else.